Welcome back to the House of M series here at Comicstorian, your #1 place for dramatic readings of your favorite comic books. Last time, we covered the main House of M story by Brian Michael Bendis, but today, I'm going to be telling you the House of M story of Spider-Man by Mark Waid. The sun has barely risen as Peter Parker looks down at his sleeping wife Gwen and son Richie. As Gwen rolls over, she wakes up and asks, "Why is he crying?" Peter sits down next to her, telling her, "It's early. Go back to sleep. Everything's okay." But that's just it. Everything isn't okay. This is a different world. Here, mutants are the dominant species, and among their poster children is the publicity-revealed, incredibly famous Spider-Man. And today, of all days, is the web crawler's birthday. While Peter works out in his gym, Uncle Ben stops by saying they've got a busy day ahead of them. It's time to clean up before they're running late. Peter hops down saying, sure, he just needs to wash up and shave. But as Peter does that, he comes out and Ben asks, "What? Did he mean to shave his entire head?" Peter says it doesn't look that bad. And Ben laughs, telling him that when they were younger, they did everything they could not to go bald. As the two board Peter's personal helicopter, Ben asks, "Isn't that a bit drastic?" Peter says, "Yeah, but that's how he woke up feeling. Drastic. Like today is the beginning somehow, and he doesn't really know why." Later, at the convention for the National Association for Police and Security, former officer George Stacy walks by a pair of security officers. George asks, "Is there anything wrong?" And the mutant security guards tell him that he is a Homo sapien, and he just walked into a place where only mutants are allowed. But while the two hassle him, a voice calls out asking, "Do they know who they're harassing?" And J. Jonah Jameson pushes his way through, holding his badge saying he is the personal publicist to Peter Parker, the amazing Spider-Man. But do they know who this man is that they are giving trouble to? That's Mr. Stacy, Peter Parker's father-in-law. One of the guards backs away apologizing, saying, "Please, go right through." And as George begins to leave, he pauses, turning, saying that he could use him. "Meet me inside, racist." A few minutes later, George steps out, telling everyone that he would like to thank them for coming out. They have all gathered here to showcase a new non-lethal weapon and best restraining device ever, inspired by his son-in-law, Spider-Man. George points over to the guard from before, telling him to attack. As the guard hesitates, Jonah pushes him out, saying, "What are you waiting for, idiot?" The guard charges out to attack, but George uses a pair of web shooters to string the guard up, telling the crowd to imagine what men and women armed with these could do. But meanwhile, over at Oscorp, Gwen begins taking inventory, and Norman tells her it is such a pleasure meeting her here on his premises. Gwen looks up, saying that as of 1201, this facility and everything in it will belong to Spider-Man Inc. However, there seems to be some missing prototype weapons that are not here. Norman laughs, saying they know how it is, robberies and such. He will be making sure that the staff is promptly waiting at the unemployment line. But what do they plan to do with these weapons anyway? Start a war? Gwen checks off on her clipboard, saying that they are actually planning to stop a few. She will be looking to render the chemical weapons inert, and now she'll have his toys to play with. Norman scowls, asking, is she telling him that they bought his company just so that they can undo all of his work? And Gwen smiles, asking, "Oh, did we forget to mention that part? And as it would seem, it is 1201. Please leave, Mr. Osborn, and have a good day." Later that night, Aunt May gets Richie ready for Peter's surprise party when she sees a news piece on Peter and notices him bald? Before she can ask what he was thinking, a large man grabs Richie. May spins back asking, "Who? Crusher Hogan? You almost gave me a heart attack." The large wrestler laughs, putting Richie on his shoulder, saying that he's sorry about that, but he couldn't miss dropping off a birthday present for his arch rival. May asks, is he not coming to the party? And Crusher tells her no, he's got a match in the Meadowlands. Just came by to leave the present, but also 'cause the Green Goblin's got a preliminary bout with Spider-Man Jr. Later, as Peter arrives back home, everyone yells, "Surprise!" and gives him well wishes. But as May tells Richie to go say hi, Richie yells, "No!" Peter kneels down saying, "It's just a haircut, nothing to worry about." But before he could hold Richie, Jonah runs up yelling, "Mr. Parker, Mr. Peter grabs him by the collar, asking what is so damn important that he has to interrupt family time. Jonah says he was just going to wish him but Peter shoves him off, asking, "That's it? To suck up? That is not why he pays him an obscene amount of money for. Just get out of here and go back to work." Jonah walks away saying, "It doesn't matter what he pays me. This has to stop." As Peter returns to Gwen, she asks, "How is everything? How is he?" Peter goes to kiss her, saying he is rich, famous, and married to the most beautiful woman in the world, and able to yell at JJJ until his teeth rattle. He has everything he could ever wish for. Gwen asks, "Yeah? Well, he could have wished for world peace." Peter pulls back irritated, and Gwen says she was kidding. Come on. The support cast can't enjoy themselves if the star is grumpy. Peter leaves, saying he needs to hit the men's room. But as Peter begins to leave the bathroom, he overhears his bodyguard Rhino talking to Mary Jane Watson. Rhino asks, "You're in the movie with Parker, right?" And she tells him that's right, but what about him? What's it like? Rhino then asks, "What's what like? Being the world's most useless bodyguard?" She asks what it's like being around him. And Rhino says, "You know, nice guy, but always the center of the universe. Gets whatever he wants, and people can't do enough for him. People like him start out already on third base with their mutant genes. Not the same as some guy whose rhino suit gives him powers." Mary Jane laughs, saying, "Yeah, if he tried to pass and got caught, imagine the scandal. It would end your life." But back at his apartment, Jonah wallows in his own self-pity, saying that stupid Parker is a phony. Well, he isn't fooled. No more lying for him. Gonna call him now, and just then the window bursts as the Green Goblin flies in laughing. Jonah asks, "Hogan? What?" The Goblin grabs Jonah by the neck, saying, "No, not Hogan. Try the Green Goblin. How would you like to destroy Spider-Man?" Jonah stares for a moment in fear, but then he smiles, asking, "When does he start?" The next morning, Jonah wakes up in a pile of trash asking, "Where am I? Oh, right. The Goblin tied me up to that ridiculous glider and tossed me in the dump. Also, he could give me this?" Jonah holds up a book with the title, Peter Parker's Journal. Keep out. And Jonah begins cackling, saying it was worth it. Now he has the goods on Parker. Jonah starts to walk home, reading parts of it. One read where Peter was so timid that when his eyes met with Liz Allen's in study hall, he froze up because she looked at him in disgust when he used his inhaler. Another time was when he was getting yelled at by the coach when they were supposed to be showering after gym. But Flash and the others would always laugh at him because of how skinny he was. Jonah continues reading as he hurries home, saying this was well worth it. Later that day, after coming off an appearance on a talk show about promoting his movie, Rhino runs up to Peter telling him that they might have a problem. Jameson didn't show up for work. What's more, there's security footage from the hotel last night showing the Green Goblin attacking him. George leans in asking, "Isn't that his pro wrestling partner? Why would Crusher Hogan want to abduct Jonah?" Gwen then says that's one of Osborn's gliders. And George then says, "Okay, now then there's a new question. What could Norman Osborn possibly have to do with the Green Goblin?" Peter tells Rhino to go talk to Crusher and see if there's anything he can learn. Just make sure not to. But before Peter could tell him not to hurt him, Rhino was already gone. A short while later, Rhino slams Crusher against the wall, saying he's not going to ask again. Was that his suit? Crusher coughs, saying, "The video's a fake! They can tell just by looking at the suit! And Peter would never send him for this! They trust each other!" Rhino punches the wall, yelling, "He is really losing his patience!" But as Crusher is thrown about, he stops moving, and Rhino says, "Uh-oh." Elsewhere, Peter visits Norman on his rooftop golf course, and Norman says yes, he built that glider. Veers to the left, unless you... Peter stops him, asking who could have gotten it. Norman swings, saying he should ask his wife. Does he not keep track of his businesses at all? He just paid a ridiculously large sum of money for all of the patents and prototypes. Peter says that is ridiculous, but Norman stops him, saying Gwen was at his lab all day yesterday taking inventory. That glider belongs to him. Later that night, Peter plays with Richie when he gets a call from Ben, saying that they got a tip that Jonah was on the V-Train platform at Queens. Something about raving like a lunatic. Peter puts on his costume, and Gwen asks why is he doing that? Peter smiles, saying he's still got a movie to promote. And Peter then rushes over to the subway looking for Jonah, holding up a magazine with his picture on it, asking, has anyone seen this man? Some of the people tell him yeah, but instead of telling him where, they all ask if he could wall crawl or spin a web. When out of the corner of his eye, Peter sees Jonah. But as he jumps over the crowd, he notices people surrounding him. Jonah yells into a camera that this journal and handwriting analysis will verify that this is Peter Parker's diary. This smoking gun was woven by his hand. Ladies and gentlemen, this journal reveals the truth about Peter Parker. His powers are not genetic. They are simply the result of a laboratory accident when he was a teenager. That's right! Remember the rest of your lives where you were and what you were doing the day you learned that the world-famous Spider-Man is not a mutant. He is a Homo sapien. In the coming week, news of Peter's false claims of being a mutant spread across the globe. No one in the world, not even Gwen, knew of this secret. Everyone has begun to denounce Spider-Man, and even a child who loved him was beaten nearly to death by schoolmates. With hearing that, Peter quietly snuck into the hospital room of the child, and a guard walks in asking what is he doing here. Peter says that he came to check on Crusher Hogan, and then he heard about the Spidey fan here. He got beaten within an inch of his life because he loved me. It's like a new fad. The guard grabs his gun, saying that he is trespassing, and Peter sulks, telling him to just go ahead and arrest him then. The guard asks, is he going to hurt anyone? And Peter tells him that's not really something he has to try to do. After a few moments of silence, the guard sits down asking what happened. And Peter asks, does he not get cable? Someone dressed as the Green Goblin gave his journal to a man with a haircut like a scrub brush. Now the whole world knows he is a fake, and he used to make out with his pillow. And his bodyguard beat and nearly killed the real Green Goblin. Which is to say, the wrong Green Goblin, which made everyone hate him even more. The guard then says no. What happened to him? He was on top of the world a few days ago, and a couple setbacks later, he's pathetic. Peter asks, hasn't he heard? Humans are weak. That's why mutants rule. Didn't they teach him anything growing up? Just then, someone calls out to the guard, and he quickly runs to the door to hide Peter from being seen. The other guard tells him to get ready. Every man is being mobilized to Times Square. It's the Rhino. He's gone crazy and is tearing up everything in sight. As the second guard leaves, the first turns back asking, did he hear that? But as he does, Peter is already gone. The guard then walks to the window saying, good, stop whining and do something. A short while later, Rhino charges through the streets, flipping cars, and telling everyone to get back. Stop staring at me! I just want to be left alone! But suddenly he is webbed up, and Peter tells him he is sending some mixed signals then, because it looks like he is begging for a fight. Rhino yells that he was just following orders. This is all his fault! Peter says to hold that thought, his spider sense is going off, and he catches something. Soon, people surround Peter, throwing garbage at him, telling him to go back where you came from. He's nothing but a freak. Rhino sneaks away into the subway, but then he hears someone laughing in the shadows. Rhino asks, "Who's there?" And the voice says, "He'll give him a hint. First, he's green. Second, he's a goblin." Rhino then asks, "What does he want?" And Goblin says he wants to free him from that freakish armor, from his trouble with the law. And all it would take is every last shred of Peter Parker's dignity. Rhino begins to hear the police coming and says, "Fine, behind Parker's house, tonight." Later, Rhino waits, and Goblin flies in saying, "They are meeting in the lion's den. I love it!" But as Goblin gets closer, Vulture, Electro, and the Ox all appear, and Rhino says he really hopes his friends aren't going to be an issue. Kill him! Vulture flies up, grabbing Goblin by the neck, and throws him off his glider. As he falls, Electro electrocutes him repeatedly enough to catch Gwen's attention. Goblin then starts to get up, pulling out a small device, and as he presses it, the glider explodes next to Electro. The Ox rushes in next, but Goblin grabs his arm and throws him into a wall. Gwen screams as the Ox lands next to her, and Goblin tells her to get back if she wants to live. This doesn't concern her. Rhino then runs in, grabbing a hold of the Goblin, telling the others to get the mask. Vulture reaches out and pulls the mask off to reveal a crazed and deranged Peter Parker underneath. Rhino stares, asking, "Boss?" And a confused Peter asks, "What?" Peter looks around saying, "Okay, I know this looks bad, but they're gonna have to back off. He was trying to trap the real Goblin." Rhino asks how. Walk them through it. Peter says that he suspects it's someone who really hates him. He could be anyone, maybe even Norman Osborn. That's the point, he doesn't know. Gwen asks, by drawing him out here, where his family lives? That doesn't make any sense. Peter looks up, saying she doesn't believe him. Fine. Peter then slams the back of his head into Rhino's nose, and using his free hand to fire a strand of web around Gwen's neck. Rhino shouts, asking, "What is he doing?" And Peter yells to let him go. As Peter gets up and takes Gwen, he tells everyone to back up, and Gwen says he'd do it? He'd kill her? Peter says that the Goblin already killed her. It's in his journal. Rhino begins to ask, what is he talking about? But Peter pulls Gwen out, saying it's nothing. It's just a bluff. She knows he'd never hurt her. He just needs to get away. Gwen struggles to breathe, asking where? And Peter tells her where he belongs. Do something for him, though. Do one thing, please. As Peter rips the webbing off, he begins to cry, saying, "Don't let me near our baby." Peter then jumps onto another glider to get away. But as the Vulture chases after, there's a blinding light and a loud robotic voice yelling, "Halt!" A sentinel flies over Peter, telling him to halt, but when it can't catch him, it turns to Vulture. Vulture quickly turns back to get away, and Gwen asks what happened. Vulture says that since her husband was outed, they have been dusting off every human control law on the books. It's understandable to be upset, but he ain't going to some prison camp for flying without a mutation. Later that night, Gwen lays in bed, and her father George says that he is going to kill him. Gwen tells him that Peter was bluffing. He wouldn't have done anything to her, not after the way he begged her to keep him away from Richie. If he needs saving, then they have got to do something. Ben then walks in, saying that Peter's world is crumbling around him. The House of M has issued an imperial order. They're confiscating everything, down to the last web shooter. Ben sits on the end of the bed and holds his head, saying he just wants his boy back. Gwen hugs him, saying, then they will go get him. They can use the signal from one of the trackers Peter uses to boost his spider sense. It may just lure him to them. George says they need the book though. How are they going to get it? What are they going to tell Jameson? Gwen finishes latching a web shooter on and says, thwip. Later that night, Gwen, George, and Ben all sneak into Jonah's home. But as they quietly move towards the inner parts of the apartment, they find a locked door. George says that he should be able to get in. One of these pass cards should. But before he could even attempt, a giant robotic arm punches through the wall. The robot with a screen with Jonah's face on it smiles, and Jonah asks, "Did that wall crawler send them? He knows not to show his face around here." Everyone starts webbing up the screen, and Jonah starts pulling it off, asking, "Is this the best they can do?" Jonah attacks, but through the window, Peter jumps in and rips the arm off. Peter bashes the arm into the screen, shouting, "Don't you ever touch her again!" Through the smoke, George walks out saying that he found the book. It was in a safe and... Peter webs the journal saying thanks, then helps Gwen up saying he appreciates their help. Gwen tells him to come home, but without a word, Peter jumps back out of the window and leaves. Gwen begins to cry, saying it was all a waste. He wouldn't talk, he wouldn't listen, and they didn't even get the journal. George holds up the journal attached to a line of web and says, "Thwip." The next morning, George closes the journal saying he didn't think he'd die because of Spider-Man, and Gwen tells him that's nothing. He killed me off and married Mary Jane Watson. Ben gets up asking, "What about him? He was practically killed in the first scene." Ben scoffs, saying Peter despises them, or he's angry at least, very angry. Gwen starts flipping through the journal again, saying all this still hurt him. What does it mean when a person's fantasy life is tragic? Who goes out of their way to feel so terrible? Meanwhile, over in an abandoned building, several homeless humans sleep when suddenly there is a loud siren and a blinding light flashes in. Several mutant officers storm in, telling everyone to get out. In the name of the House of M, the New York police are commandeering this facility. Now get out. One of the men asks, where are they supposed to go? There is no place for humans. An officer reaches out with his tendrils, telling him to shut up. But Peter jumps in and punches him, saying to let the man go. If they want people to get out, fine, but they can't abuse them. Before he could finish, the officer opens their mask and sprays Peter with fleshy goop. Peter grabs a handful of the flesh and punches the mutant, telling him that that is gross. The other officers begin to take out their guns, but Peter tells them don't. They don't want to get into it with him. He has nothing to lose, not anymore. Just help the other officer and report that Spider-Man got away. The second officer stares, then helps up their partner, telling them, Spider-Man got away, let's go. As the officers leave, Peter turns back, telling everyone that he bought them some time. Grab everything, and all of the humans start grabbing at Peter, saying they don't need someone like him helping. They will give his body to the cops. Peter jumps on a wall, telling them that he doesn't want to hurt them. One of the older men yells, "It's too late for that, freak!" A few hours later, Peter calls Ben, saying he doesn't know what to do. Everything was so great. I had everything I could have wanted, but I woke up every morning feeling guilty. I always have. At first, I just wrote about the guilt, but when that didn't make it go away, I started making up stories to justify it. And eventually, that obviously wasn't enough. Looking back, I started to sabotage my life when I started to, to acknowledge a truth. And even then, I still don't know what that truth is. Ben tells him to just come home, but Peter says that he can't. Ben then asks, where is he? Where can they meet? Later, out by the river, Peter and Ben watch as a group of humans flip and burn a police car, and Peter says to just look at them. He doesn't even know how to stop it. All he knows is that he's the one that started it. Peter pulls off the mask, saying he ruined everything. He wrecked their lives. He wrecked their families' lives. Ben hugs him, saying they had it good for a long time. No one's taking that away. Always remember, with great power, Peter finishes by saying, comes great responsibility, I know. Ben goes on saying that he made them rich and powerful in a hostile world. Everything depended on him, every second. He was the hero, and they were his supporting cast. Like it never mattered what they did, as long as he kept making an effort. No wonder he stumbled. They let him. Not too responsible of them. Peter tells him that it's okay, but Ben hugs him, saying it's not. He is the one that's saying it's okay. They aren't mad at him or afraid of him. They don't need some glamorous story. They just want him back. Peter says that as long as he's around, the mutants are going to keep turning up the heat. So Ben tells him that maybe it's time for him to be a hero, one last time. Peter begins to climb up onto the bridge, and as Ben watches, he starts to cry, pulling out a camera. He looks through the shutter, then takes a picture. The next morning, the Daily Bugle prints the headlines. A coward's way out. Disgraced Spider-Man was no hero, with a photo of Peter hanging himself. The news travels fast across the city, but even faster to the House of M. Magneto sees the news article strung up with some web, and a note reading, "If you want me to stay dead, ease up on the humans." Magneto then groans and crushes the paper. Meanwhile, at an undisclosed location, Peter and his family get ready to go fishing, and Gwen says that she's never seen him so relaxed before. There are New Yorkers who think he's still alive, and ones who think he was secretly a rogue mutant. And then there are the alleged sightings. Spider-Man isn't a dead topic by any stretch, but at least that isn't Peter's cross to bear anymore. Across the lake, Peter tells Richie, "All right, press on his hands 2 times. 1, 2. As Peter shoots a strand of web, Richie laughs watching it go into the lake. Peter then says, "Okay, this next part is important. In fact, repeat after me. With great power." And as Peter yanks his arm back, he pulls a fish out from the lake. Comes great fish. And that is the conclusion to the House of M Spider-Man story. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you did, please be sure to give the video a like, leave a comment down below, subscribe to the channel, and click that bell icon to get notifications when videos go live. And if you want to find more of me, Dan, you can find me on Twitch at twitch.tv/Cyloo91. That's CYLOO91. And of course, if you want to support the channel here, you can also head over to our Patreon at patreon.com/comicstorian, where we've got a lot of great stuff for all of our patrons over there, and we really appreciate all of that support. I'll see you guys next time.